The wrought iron gate at the end of Yates Crawford's property had rusted in place, weeds growing through its bars like nature's way of sealing off what the man inside had already closed to the world. June Shepherd stood before it in the late afternoon heat of August 1882, her traveling dress dusty from the long journey from Sacramento, her fingers wrapped around the iron bars as she stared up the winding dirt road that led to the ranch house in the distance. Behind her, the stagecoach driver cleared his throat impatiently, but she did not turn around. She had come too far to turn back now, even if the stories the townspeople in San Francisco had told her would have sent a wiser woman running. "Miss, I really ought to be getting back before dark," the driver called. "That man up there, he does not take kindly to visitors," fired a warning shot over the last fellow's head who tried to deliver supplies, nearly took his hat clean off. June finally looked back at him, her green eyes determined despite the fear that made her hands tremble. "I understand. You can go. I will manage from here." The driver shook his head, muttering something about stubborn women and foolish errands, but he clicked the reins and the horses started moving. June watched the dust cloud follow the stagecoach back toward the main road, then turned her attention back to the gate. The ranch beyond looked well maintained from what she could see, the fences sturdy, the land healthy despite 6 years of isolation. She had heard about Yates Crawford in whispered conversations at the boarding house where she had stayed the previous night. The hermit rancher who had shut himself away after tragedy struck, who refused all visitors, who lived alone with his cattle and horses and whatever ghosts haunted him. June took a deep breath and pushed against the gate. It did not budge. She pushed harder, throwing her weight against it, and heard the screech of metal on metal as it began to move. The sound echoed across the quiet valley, and she knew that if anyone was up at that ranch house, they would have heard it. Her heart hammered as she squeezed through the opening she had created, her dress catching on the rust and tearing slightly at the hem. She did not care. She had not worn her best dress for this journey, knowing it would likely be ruined before she reached her destination. The walk up the dirt road seemed endless in the heat. Sweat trickled down her back, and she wished she had thought to bring more water. The canteen at her hip was nearly empty, drained during the stagecoach ride. On either side of the road, cattle grazed peacefully, lifting their heads to watch her pass with mild curiosity. They looked healthy and well cared for, which surprised her given what she had heard about the man who owned them. Whatever else Yates Crawford was, he apparently still took his responsibilities seriously. She was halfway to the house when she heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. June froze, her breath catching in her throat. She scanned the landscape and saw him standing on a small rise to her left, the rifle pointed not quite at her but close enough to make his message clear. He was tall, even at this distance, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. A worn cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "Turn around," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. "This is private property. You are trespassing." June squared her shoulders, forcing herself to stand straight despite the fear making her legs weak. "My name is June Shepherd. I need to speak with you, Mr. Crawford. I do not care what your name is. Turn around and leave the way you came." "I cannot do that." Her voice wavered slightly, and she hated herself for it. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times during the journey, had imagined herself confident and composed. Reality was proving far more difficult. "I have come all the way from Sacramento. I need your help." There was a long silence. The man on the hill did not move, the rifle still raised. June could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the sun beating down on her uncovered head. She had lost her bonnet somewhere on the road and had not bothered to retrieve it. "Whatever you need, you will not find it here," Yates finally said. "There is a town 5 miles back. Someone there can help you." "No," June said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "They cannot. You are the only one who can help me, Mr. Crawford. Your brother sent me." She saw him stiffen, saw the rifle lower slightly. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become harder somehow, edged with something that might have been pain. "My brother is dead." "I know," June said softly. "Thomas died 3 months ago, but before he did, he told me to come here. He told me you were the only person he trusted, the only one who could help me with what I need to do." The silence that followed was even longer than before. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. June waited, hardly daring to breathe. She watched as Yates Crawford slowly lowered the rifle completely, then started walking down the rise toward her. As he drew closer, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that had clearly been neglected. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots scuffed from years of hard work. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark brown and haunted, carrying a weight that made her heart ache even though she did not know him. He stopped about 10 feet away from her, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to let him see that she was sincere, that she truly had known his brother. "Thomas never mentioned you," Yates said finally. "We only knew each other for a few months before he died. He was working as a surveyor in Sacramento, boarding at the same house where I was staying. He became ill very suddenly. The doctor said it was his heart. In his final days, he told me about you, about this ranch. He told me about what happened 6 years ago, about why you closed yourself off from the world." Yates's jaw tightened. "He had no right to tell you anything about me." "Perhaps not," June agreed, "but he did anyway, and I am grateful for it. Because I need someone who understands what it is like to lose everything. I need someone who can teach me how to survive when the world feels impossible to face." "Why?" The question was sharp, demanding. June took a breath, steadying herself. "Because 4 months ago, my parents and my younger sister were killed when their wagon went off a cliff during a storm. I was supposed to be with them, but I had stayed behind in Sacramento to attend to some business. They were on their way to meet me when it happened. I have spent the last 4 months trying to figure out how to keep living when everyone I love is gone. Thomas understood that. He told me about how you lost your wife and daughter, about how you have managed to build a life here despite that loss. He thought you could help me do the same." She saw the flash of pain cross Yates's face before he shut it down, his expression going carefully blank. "Thomas was wrong. I have not built a life here. I have built a prison, and I sure as hell cannot teach anyone how to survive grief. I barely manage it myself most days." "But you do manage it," June pressed. "You are still here. You are still taking care of this ranch, still getting up every morning even when it must feel impossible. That is more than I have been able to do. I have been drifting, staying in boarding houses and trying to figure out what to do with myself. My parents left me some money, enough to survive for a while, but I do not know what to do with my life now. I do not know how to be a person without them." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the ground. When he finally looked back up at her, his expression was unreadable. "I am sorry for your loss, Miss Shepherd, truly, but I cannot help you. I do not let people onto this property for a reason. The last thing I need is someone else depending on me, someone else I can fail to protect." "I am not asking you to protect me," June said quickly. "I am asking you to teach me. Thomas said you were planning to buy land further north before the tragedy, that you had wanted to expand, to build something bigger. He said you had dreams. I have money from my parents' estate. I could buy land, start my own ranch, build my own life. But I do not know the first thing about ranching. I grew up in the city. My father was a banker. I need someone to teach me the basics, to give me the skills I need to survive on my own. That is all I am asking. A few weeks of your time, maybe a month. Then I will leave and you can go back to your solitude. She could see him wavering, could see the conflict playing out behind those dark eyes. Part of him wanted to say no, to send her away and retreat back into his isolation. But another part, some small piece that still remembered what it was like to be human, seemed to be considering her words. "Please," she said softly. "I have nowhere else to go, no one else who understands. Thomas believed you could help me, and I am choosing to believe him. Even if you do not believe in yourself anymore." The words seemed to strike something deep inside him. She saw his shoulders sag slightly, saw some of the rigid defensiveness leave his posture. He looked tired suddenly, bone-deep tired, like a man who had been fighting a war for too long. "1 month," he said finally, his voice rough. "You can stay for 1 month. I will teach you what I can about ranching, about surviving on your own out here. But after that, you leave. And you do not ask me anything personal. You do not try to be my friend or my confidante or anything else. You learn what you need to learn and then you go. Those are my terms." Relief flooded through June so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I will stay out of your way as much as possible. I will work hard and learn fast, and I will not be a burden." Yates just nodded curtly, then turned and started walking back toward the house. June hurried to follow, her traveling bag heavy on her shoulder. As they walked, she studied the ranch more carefully. The house itself was a sturdy 2-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There was a barn nearby, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and several other outbuildings she could not immediately identify. Everything was well maintained, but had an air of loneliness about it, as if the buildings themselves felt the absence of human warmth. Yates led her up the porch steps and pushed open the front door without ceremony. The inside of the house was dim and cool after the heat of the late afternoon. June blinked as her eyes adjusted, taking in the large main room that served as both living area and kitchen. The furniture was simple but well made. A large fireplace dominated one wall, and shelves lined with books covered another. Everything was clean but sparse, as if the man who lived here had stripped away anything that was not strictly necessary for survival. "There is a room upstairs, first door on the right," Yates said, not looking at her. "It has a bed and a washstand. You can use that. Meals are at dawn, noon, and dusk. You will help prepare them and clean up after. We start work at first light, break for 2 hours in the heat of the afternoon, then work until dark. Sundays you can do what you want, but the animals still need tending. Any questions?" "No," June said, though she had 100. But she could tell from his tone that he was done talking for now, that he needed space to process whatever he was feeling about having broken his 6-year isolation. "Good. Get yourself settled. Supper is in an hour." He turned and walked out the back door, leaving June alone in the quiet house. She stood there for a moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. She had done it. She had convinced him to let her stay. Now she just had to prove that she could handle whatever he threw at her. June climbed the stairs, finding the room he had mentioned. It was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the valley. She set her bag down on the bed and moved to the washstand, pouring water from the pitcher into the bowl and splashing her face. The cool water felt wonderful after the heat of the day. She studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand, seeing the toll the last months had taken. Her face was thinner than it had been, her cheekbones more pronounced. Her auburn hair, which she had always kept neatly pinned, was coming loose from its bun, wisps sticking to her sweaty neck. Her green eyes looked older somehow, marked by the grief that had become her constant companion. She cleaned herself up as best she could, changing into a simpler dress more suitable for work, then headed back downstairs. She could hear sounds from outside and followed them, finding Yates in the kitchen garden behind the house. He was pulling vegetables, moving with the easy efficiency of someone who had done this task 1,000 times. "Can I help?" June asked. He glanced at her, and she thought she saw the slightest flicker of approval at her changed clothes. "You can gather eggs from the chicken coop. There is a basket hanging on the door." June nodded and went to find the chicken coop. She had never gathered eggs before, but she figured it could not be that difficult. She was wrong. The chickens seemed to sense her inexperience and made the task as difficult as possible, squawking and pecking at her hands as she reached under them. By the time she had collected a dozen eggs, her hands were scratched, and she was fairly certain she had acquired a deep personal dislike of poultry. When she brought the basket back to the kitchen, Yates was already there, washing vegetables in a large basin. He glanced at her scratched hands but said nothing, just pointed to a cabinet where she should put the eggs. Together, in silence, they prepared a simple meal of fried eggs, beans, and bread that Yates pulled from a covered tin on the counter. It was nothing fancy, but after the long day of travel, it tasted like a feast to June. They ate at the large wooden table, the silence between them heavy but not entirely uncomfortable. June wanted to say something, to try to break through the walls he had built around himself, but she remembered his terms. No personal questions, no attempts at friendship. Just teaching and learning, and then she would leave. After dinner, she helped him clean the dishes, working by lamplight as the last of the daylight faded. When everything was put away, Yates said, "We start at first light. That means up by 5. Do not be late." "I will be ready," June promised. He nodded and disappeared outside, probably to do a final check on the animals. June climbed the stairs to her room, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She changed into her nightgown and crawled into bed, expecting to lie awake worrying about whether she had made the right decision coming here. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, and for the first time in 4 months, she did not dream of the cliff where her family had died. June woke to darkness and the sound of movement downstairs. She fumbled for the matches on the bedside table, lighting the small lamp and checking the pocket watch that had been her father's. 5 o'clock exactly. She dressed quickly in the work dress she had worn the evening before, pinned her hair back securely, and hurried downstairs. Yates was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked up when she entered, and she thought she saw a flicker of surprise that she had actually made it down on time. "Coffee is ready. Drink it fast. The animals do not wait for us to wake up properly." June poured herself a cup, the strong, bitter taste making her wince slightly. She was used to tea, delicately prepared with cream and sugar. This was harsh and black as night, but it did its job, sending alertness flooding through her system. They ate a quick breakfast of bread and jam, then Yates led her out into the pre-dawn darkness. The air was cool, a blessed relief from the heat that would come later. Stars still dotted the sky, bright and countless in a way they never were in the city. "First lesson," Yates said as they approached the barn. "Everything on a ranch revolves around the animals. They need feeding, watering, and checking every single day without fail. You can be sick, exhausted, heartbroken. It does not matter. They depend on you completely, and if you fail them, they die. Understand?" "Yes," June said, though the weight of responsibility in his words was daunting. He showed her how to feed the horses, how to measure out the grain and hay, how to check their water troughs and fill them from the well. Then came the cattle, which required walking out into the pastures to ensure they had access to the stream that ran through the property. Yates pointed out signs of potential problems, things to watch for, fence breaks that needed mending, animals that seemed lethargic or ill. By the time the sun was fully up, June was already sweating and tired. Her soft city hands were developing blisters from the unfamiliar work, and her back ached from bending and lifting. But she did not complain. She had asked for this, had begged for it, and she would prove she could handle it. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake at 5, tend the animals, eat a quick breakfast, then work on whatever needed doing around the ranch. Sometimes it was mending fences, which meant hours of digging post holes and stringing wire. Sometimes it was mucking out stalls, hot, smelly work that left her clothes filthy and her muscles screaming. Sometimes it was garden work, weeding and watering and harvesting vegetables. Yates was a patient but demanding teacher. He showed her something once, maybe twice, and then expected her to remember it. He corrected her when she made mistakes but did not coddle her or make excuses for her inexperience. At first, June found his terseness frustrating. She was used to polite conversation, to social niceties. Yates offered none of that. He spoke only when necessary, sharing information about the work but nothing about himself. But as the days passed, June began to appreciate the silence. There was something peaceful about working alongside someone who did not expect her to perform grief in a certain way, who did not ask how she was feeling or offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds. Yates understood that sometimes the only way to survive pain was to keep moving, to fill your days with work so exhausting that you fell into bed too tired to think. It was nearly 2 weeks into her stay when things began to shift between them. They were mending a section of fence on the far edge of the property, the work made more difficult by the rocky terrain. June was struggling to dig a post hole in the hard, packed earth, sweat pouring down her face despite the bandana she had tied around her forehead. "Here," Yates said, moving closer. "You are working too hard. Let the weight of the bar do the work for you, like this." He positioned himself behind her, his hands covering hers on the digging bar, guiding her movements. "Feel that. You use the weight and momentum, not just muscle." June could barely concentrate on the technique. This was the closest Yates had been to her since she arrived, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body against her back, could smell the mixture of sweat and soap, and something else that was distinctly him. Her heart was suddenly racing in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. "Try it yourself," Yates said, stepping back. June blinked, trying to clear her head. She adjusted her grip on the bar and tried to replicate what he had shown her. This time, the bar sank deeper into the earth, the work becoming noticeably easier. "Better," Yates said, something that might have been approval in his voice. They worked in silence for a while longer, but something had changed. June kept stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking, studying the strong lines of his profile, the capable way he moved, the surprising gentleness with which he handled the tools and the land. She found herself wondering what he had been like before the tragedy that had broken him, whether he had smiled easily, whether he had been quick to laugh. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, June took a risk. "Thomas told me you used to sing. He said you had a good voice, that you would sing while you worked." Yates's hand stilled on the potatoes he was peeling. "Thomas talked too much. He missed you. He said he tried to visit several times over the years, but you would not let him pass the gate." "No," Yates said, his voice tight. "I would not." "Why?" He set down the knife and potato, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. Because every time I looked at him, I saw the life I was supposed to have, the future that got stolen from me. It was easier to be alone than to be reminded of what I had lost. It was the most personal thing he had said to her since she arrived. June held her breath, afraid that if she spoke, he would retreat back behind his walls. Her name was Margaret, Yates continued, his voice rough with emotion. Our daughter was called Rose. She was only 3 years old. They were coming back from town, bringing supplies. I had stayed behind to deal with a sick horse. There was a summer storm, sudden and violent. Lightning spooked the horses pulling the wagon. It went off the road down into a ravine. By the time I found them, it was too late. June felt tears burning her eyes. I am so sorry. Everyone was sorry. The whole town came to the funeral telling me how sorry they were, offering help I did not want. They looked at me like I was a tragedy, something to be pitied. I could not stand it. So I sent them all away and closed the gate, and I have not let anyone past it until you. Why did you let me through? June asked softly. Yates turned to look at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. Because when you were standing there telling me about your family, I saw myself 6 years ago. That same look of someone drowning in grief, trying desperately to find something solid to hold on to. And I thought about how alone I felt back then, how everyone wanted to help but no one really understood. I thought maybe I could spare you some of that loneliness. You have, June said, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea how much you have helped me, even without trying. Just having something to do every day, having a purpose, having someone who does not treat me like I am made of glass. It has made more difference than you know. Something shifted in Yates's expression, some of the hardness softening. You have done well here, better than I expected when I saw you show up in that traveling dress with your soft city hands. June laughed, a real laugh, the first she had managed in months. I thought those chickens were going to peck me to death that first day. A smile ghosted across Yates's face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. But she had seen it, and the sight did something strange to her heart. They finished preparing dinner, the silence between them different now, warmer somehow. As they ate, June found herself studying him more openly, noticing details she had missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hands were scarred from years of hard work. The lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who had once smiled often but had forgotten how. After dinner, instead of disappearing outside as he usually did, Yates pulled down a book from one of the shelves and settled into the worn armchair near the fireplace. June cleaned up the dishes, then found her own book and sat in the other chair. They read in companionable silence as the lamp burned low, and when June finally climbed the stairs to bed, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt almost content. The days continued to pass, and June found herself growing stronger both physically and emotionally. Her hands developed calluses, her muscles adapted to the constant physical labor, and her skin took on a sun-touched glow despite her best efforts with bonnets and long sleeves. But more than the physical changes, she felt herself becoming more capable, more confident. She could now feed and water all the animals without supervision, could mend a fence properly, could even saddle a horse without help, though riding was still a work in progress. Yates began to talk more as the third week arrived. Not long conversations, but small comments about the ranch, stories about the land, observations about the weather and the animals. June learned that he had built this ranch from nothing, that he and his father had come west from Missouri when Yates was just 18. His father had died 5 years later, leaving the ranch to Yates. He had met Margaret in San Francisco when he had gone to sell cattle, had courted her for 6 months, before bringing her back to the ranch as his bride. She loved it here, Yates said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their new routine, these quiet moments at the end of the day. Said she had never felt so free as she did on this land. She learned to ride like she was born to it, helped me with everything. She was tougher than she looked, could work alongside me from dawn to dusk, and never complain. She sounds wonderful, June said. She was. Yates was quiet for a moment. Rose had her mother's spirit, fearless and bright. She used to follow me everywhere, chattering constantly about everything she saw. I was teaching her to ride. She was so proud of herself when she finally managed to stay on the pony by herself. June reached over and gently touched his hand where it rested on the porch railing. She expected him to pull away, but he did not. Instead, his fingers curled slightly, accepting the comfort she offered. "Thank you for telling me about them," June said. "I have not talked about them in 6 years, have not even said their names out loud. It hurts less than I expected." "Grief is strange that way," June said. "Sometimes talking about the people we lost makes it worse. Sometimes it makes it better. I think it depends on who we are talking to." Yates turned his hand over, his palm pressing against hers. The contact sent warmth racing up June's arm. "Tell me about your family." So she did. She told him about her father, practical and kind, always ready with advice and a steady hand. About her mother, who had run their household with loving efficiency and had taught June everything from embroidery to negotiation. About her younger sister, Caroline, who had been just 16 when she died, full of dreams about the future and plans for adventure. Caroline wanted to be a teacher, June said, her voice catching. She was so good with children, so patient, she would have been wonderful at it. After we lost them, I found her diary. She had written about all the places she wanted to teach, all the children she wanted to help. It broke my heart all over again, reading about dreams that would never come true. "What about your dreams?" Yates asked. "Before all this happened, what did you want for your life?" June was quiet for a moment, considering. "Honestly, I do not think I really knew. My life was so planned out for me. I was supposed to marry someone suitable, someone my father approved of, and become a proper society wife. I went along with it because it was expected, but I do not think I ever really wanted it. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Yates said firmly. "It makes you honest. Most people never have the courage to admit when they are living a life they do not want." "What about now?" June asked. "Do you want this life? The isolation, the loneliness?" Yates was quiet for so long that June thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost uncertain. "I did not think I wanted anything else. I thought I had shut that part of myself down permanently, but lately I have started to wonder if maybe I was wrong." June's heart was suddenly pounding. What changed? He turned to look at her, and in his dark eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. "You did." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. June knew she should be careful, should remember that she had only known this man for 3 weeks, that he was still healing from a devastating loss, that she herself was still raw from grief. But her heart did not seem to care about any of that. Her heart only knew that when Yates looked at her like he was looking at her now, she felt alive in a way she had not felt in months, maybe years. "Yates," she whispered, and it was the first time she had used his first name. He reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, rough and warm. "Tell me if I am wrong. Tell me if I am reading this situation incorrectly." "You are not wrong," June said, her voice barely audible. He leaned in slowly, and June met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, tentative, like they were both afraid the other might break. His lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard, and June felt something deep inside her chest crack open, some frozen place beginning to thaw. When they pulled apart, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again. I did not think I wanted to." "Are you scared?" June asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "But not enough to walk away. Not this time." They sat together on the porch long after the sun had set, holding hands and talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. June learned that Yates had a sweet tooth but rarely indulged it, that he missed music but had not played his guitar in 6 years, that he used to dream about traveling but had not left the ranch since the day of the funeral. Yates learned that June was hopeless at embroidery despite years of lessons, that she loved thunderstorms, that she had once wanted to learn to paint but her parents had thought it impractical. When June finally climbed the stairs to her room that night, she felt like she was floating. She changed into her nightgown and lay in bed, touching her lips and remembering the kiss. She knew it was probably too soon, knew they were both still healing, knew there were 1,000 practical reasons to be cautious. But she also knew that something real was blooming between them, something worth taking a risk for. The next morning, things were different. Yates met her in the kitchen with coffee and a smile, a real smile that transformed his face and made him look years younger. They worked together all day, but now there were casual touches, hands brushing as they passed tools back and forth, his hand at her back as he guided her through a new task. At lunch, they sat close together under the shade of an old oak tree, their shoulders touching as they ate. "Your month is almost up," Yates said suddenly. June's stomach dropped. She had been so caught up in the present that she had not thought about the deadline. "Yes, I suppose it is. You still plan to leave, to buy your own land and start your own ranch?" June turned to look at him, trying to read his expression. "I do not know. I came here with that plan, but I have learned that plans can change. What do you want me to do?" Yates set down his sandwich and turned to face her fully. "I want you to stay, not as a student, not as someone I am teaching. I want you to stay because I do not want you to leave. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but June, I feel more alive when I am with you than I have felt in 6 years. You make me want to open that gate again, to let the world back in. You make me remember who I used to be before grief turned me into a hermit." Tears sprang to June's eyes. "I want to stay. I want to be here with you, building something together. But I do not want you to feel like you are replacing Margaret and Rose. I do not want to be a substitute for what you lost." "You are not," Yates said firmly, taking her hands in his. "What I had with Margaret was beautiful, and I will always love her memory. But what I feel for you is different, its own thing. You are not a replacement. You are a new chapter, a fresh start. Does that make sense?" "Yes," June said, smiling through her tears. "It makes perfect sense. Because I feel the same way about you. I will always love my family, always miss them. But being with you does not diminish that love. It just means I am learning to live again, to build a new life from the pieces of the old one." Yates pulled her close, kissing her with more passion than the gentle kiss they had shared the night before. June melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Yates was grinning. "So you will stay?" "I will stay," June confirmed. "For as long as you will have me." "How about forever?" Yates asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. June's heart skipped a beat. "Are you asking me what I think you are asking me?" "I know it is fast," Yates said. "I know most people would say we should wait, should take more time. But I spent 6 years alone, June. 6 years frozen in grief, convinced I would never feel anything again. You thawed me out. You reminded me what it feels like to hope, to want something beyond just surviving another day. I do not want to waste any more time. Life is too short and too uncertain. So yes, I am asking. June Shepherd, will you marry me? Joy flooded through June so powerfully that she actually laughed. Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes. Yates whooped and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and June felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. They decided to have a simple ceremony at the ranch, which meant Yates had to break his 6-year isolation and actually go into San Francisco to make arrangements. June went with him, holding his hand tightly as they rode into town together. She could see the effort it cost him to face the stares and whispers, the way people looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and pity. But Yates held his head high, and when people came up to speak to him, he was polite if not warm. They went to the church and spoke with the minister, who agreed to come out to the ranch to perform the ceremony. They bought supplies for a modest celebration, and Yates even commissioned a simple gold ring from the jeweler. The minister, a kind-faced man named Reverend Michaels, seemed genuinely pleased to see Yates out and about. "I have been praying for you for years, Mr. Crawford. I am so glad to see you finding happiness again." "Thank you," Yates said, and June could hear the emotion in his voice. "I did not think it was possible, but June here, she changed everything." On the ride back to the ranch, Yates was quiet. June could tell he was processing everything, dealing with emotions he had kept locked away for so long. She let him have his silence, just kept her hand in his and enjoyed the feeling of riding beside him. When they got back to the ranch, Yates helped her down from her horse and pulled her into a tight embrace. "Thank you." "For what?" June asked, her face pressed against his chest. "For being patient with me, for understanding that this was hard, for not giving up on me." "I could never give up on you," June said, pulling back to look up at him. "You are worth the patience, worth the wait. I love you, Yates Crawford." It was the first time either of them had said those words. Yates's eyes widened, then filled with emotion. "I love you too, June. So much it scares me sometimes." "Being scared is okay," June said, reaching up to cup his face. "As long as we are scared together." They married 3 weeks later on a bright October morning in 1882. The ceremony took place on the front porch of the ranch house, with Reverend Michaels officiating and 2 ranch hands from a neighboring property serving as witnesses. June wore a simple ivory dress she had bought in San Francisco, her auburn hair pinned up with small white flowers. Yates wore his best suit, the one he had not touched since Margaret's funeral, and June knew what it meant that he was willing to wear it again. As they exchanged vows, June felt the presence of those they had lost, but it did not feel sad. Instead, it felt like a blessing, like the people they had loved were giving them permission to move forward, to build new happiness without forgetting the old. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed June with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling, both a little teary, both overwhelmingly happy. The small celebration afterward was simple but joyful. They shared a meal with Reverend Michaels and the witnesses, drank wine that Yates had been saving for a special occasion, and cut into a small cake that June had baked that morning. As the sun began to set, their guests departed, leaving June and Yates alone. They stood together on the porch, watching the sky turn colors, holding hands and just being present in the moment. June felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a bone-deep certainty that this was where she was supposed to be. "Ready for our wedding night, Mrs. Crawford?" Yates asked, his voice warm with love and desire. "I have been ready since the day I kissed you," June said, squeezing his hand. Yates led her upstairs, and for the first time June entered what had been his bedroom. It was larger than the room she had been using, with a big bed and windows that overlooked the valley. Everything was neat and clean, and June realized that Yates must have prepared it for this night, must have cleaned out the remnants of his past to make room for their future. What followed was tender and sweet, two people who had both known loss finding comfort and pleasure in each other. Yates was patient and gentle, making sure June was comfortable every step of the way. When they finally came together fully, June felt like two broken pieces were fusing into something whole and new. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Yates tracing lazy patterns on June's bare shoulder. "I never thought I would have this again," he said quietly. "The intimacy, the connection. I thought that part of my life was over." "Me too," June admitted. "I never thought I would want someone this way, but with you it feels right. It feels like coming home." "You are my home now," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You and this ranch, and the life we are going to build together." The months that followed were some of the happiest of June's life. She and Yates settled into married life with surprising ease, working the ranch together during the day and spending the evenings raiding, talking, or simply enjoying each other's company. Yates taught her to ride properly, and soon June was galloping across the valley with confidence, feeling the wind in her hair and the power of the horse beneath her. In November, they rode into San Francisco together for supplies, and this time Yates was more relaxed, more willing to engage with the townspeople. Word had spread about his marriage, and people were genuinely happy for him, glad to see him rejoining the world. A few made comments about how fast the courtship had been, but Yates just smiled and said, "When you know, you know." As winter approached, Yates began teaching June about the business side of ranching, showing her the ledgers where he tracked expenses and income, explaining how he decided when to sell cattle and how to negotiate with buyers. June proved to have a head for numbers, thanks to her father's influence, and she began making suggestions for improvements and expansions. "You know," Yates said one evening as they reviewed the books together, "you were right about expanding. We have the resources now and the land. We could buy that parcel to the north that borders our property. It has good grazing land and another stream." "Do you want to?" June asked, looking up from the ledger. "I think I do," Yates said, sounding almost surprised. "For years, I just maintained what I had, no ambitions beyond surviving day to day. But now, with you here, I want to build something bigger. I want to create something we can pass down to our children someday." June's breath caught. "Children?" Yates reached over and took her hand. "Is that something you want? I know we have not really talked about it, but I see you with the new calves and the foals, how gentle you are with them. I think you would be an amazing mother." Tears sprang to June's eyes. "I would love to have children with you. I just did not want to assume, given everything you have been through." "Losing Rose nearly destroyed me," Yates admitted. "And I would be lying if I said the thought of having another child does not scare me, but I do not want fear to control my life anymore. I want to take the risk, want to open my heart to that possibility again. With you, I feel brave enough to try." June leaned over and kissed him softly. "Then let us try. Let us build this bigger life together, children and expanded ranch and all of it." They spent that winter planning and preparing. In February of 1883, they successfully purchased the northern parcel, expanding the ranch by nearly a third. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from San Francisco looking for steady work. Yates was nervous about having other people on the property after so many years alone, but June helped him navigate the social aspects, and soon the ranch was running more efficiently than ever. In late March, June realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, afraid to hope, then finally told Yates her suspicion. His face lit up with joy and terror in equal measure. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Not completely, but fairly certain," June said, covering his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified and overjoyed and everything in between," Yates admitted. "But yes, I am happy. So incredibly happy." They rode into San Francisco the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what June already knew. She was pregnant, due sometime in early October. As they rode back to the ranch, Yates kept glancing over at her with a mixture of wonder and protectiveness that made June's heart overflow. "You have to be careful now," he said. "No more heavy lifting, no climbing fences, no working in the heat of the day." "Yates, I am pregnant, not ill," June said with amusement. "Women work all through pregnancy. I will be fine." I know," Yates said, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "I just cannot help but worry. I cannot lose you, June. I would not survive it." June reached over and squeezed his hand. "You are not going to lose me. I am healthy and strong, and we have months to prepare. Everything will be fine." And it was fine. Remarkably so. June's pregnancy progressed normally, and while she had some morning sickness in the early months, overall she felt well and energetic. Yates hovered constantly, trying to do all her work for her, until June finally had to sit him down and explain that she needed to feel useful, needed to stay active. They compromised, with June doing lighter tasks and letting the ranch hands and Yates handle the heaviest work. As June's belly grew, Yates would sit with her in the evenings, his hand resting on the swell, feeling the baby kick and move. "Hello in there," he would say softly. "I am your father, and I cannot wait to meet you. Your mother and I have so much to teach you, so much love to give you." June would watch him during these moments, seeing the healing happening in real time. He was facing his fears, letting himself hope again, and it was beautiful to witness. In August, June started preparing the small room next to their bedroom as a nursery. Yates built a cradle from wood he had been saving, sanding it smooth and carving small designs into the headboard. June sewed blankets and tiny gowns, her fingers surprisingly adept at the stitching now that it was for someone she loved rather than an obligation. As her due date approached, Yates became increasingly nervous. He hired a midwife from San Francisco, a capable woman named Mrs. Porter who had delivered hundreds of babies. She came out to the ranch in late September to check on June and meet Yates. "Your wife is healthy and strong, Mrs. Porter told Yates after her examination. "The baby is positioned well, and I expect a normal labor and delivery. You need to stay calm, Mr. Crawford. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "I know," Yates said, but June could see his hands shaking slightly. She knew he was remembering, was fighting the ghosts of his past. That night, as they lay in bed, June turned to face him. "Talk to me. Tell me what you are feeling." Yates was quiet for a long moment. "I am afraid that history will repeat itself. That something will go wrong, that I will lose you both. The fear is almost paralyzing sometimes." "I am afraid too," June admitted. "Childbirth is dangerous, I know that. But Yates, I am not Margaret. This is not 6 years ago. We have a skilled midwife, we are prepared, and I am healthy." "You cannot let the past steal the joy of the present." "You are right," Yates said, pulling her close. "I know you are right. I am trying, June. I am really trying to trust that everything will be okay." "That is all I ask," June said, kissing his chest. "Trust and be there with me. That is all I need." June's labor began on October 7th, 1883, 2 weeks before her due date. It started with mild cramping in the morning that gradually increased throughout the day. By early evening, the contractions were strong and regular. Yates sent one of the ranch hands racing into San Francisco to fetch Mrs. Porter while he stayed with June, holding her hand and trying desperately not to panic. Mrs. Porter arrived within 2 hours, efficient and calm. She examined June, declared her to be progressing normally, and set up everything she needed. "This will likely take a while, particularly for a first baby," she told them. "Get comfortable, both of you. We are in for a long night." She was right. June labored through the night and into the next morning. Yates stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, supporting her through each contraction. When June screamed in pain, he flinched but did not leave. When she cried in exhaustion, he held her and whispered encouragements. When she was certain she could not continue, he reminded her how strong she was, how capable, how much he loved her. Finally, as the sun climbed higher in the sky on October 8th, Mrs. Porter announced that it was time to push. June was beyond exhausted, drenched in sweat and shaking with effort, but she gathered her remaining strength and bore down with each contraction. Yates supported her from behind, his arms wrapped around her, lending her his strength. "I see the head, Mrs. Porter announced. "One more big push, June. You can do this." June pushed with everything she had, and suddenly there was release and relief and the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. She collapsed back against Yates, sobbing with exhaustion and joy. "It is a boy, Mrs. Porter announced, quickly cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a blanket. "A healthy, beautiful boy." She placed the baby in June's arms, and June stared down at her son in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair like his father, and when he opened his eyes, they were dark as well. His face was red and scrunched, his tiny fists waving in the air as he continued to cry. "Hello, little one," June whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my beautiful boy." Yates leaned over June's shoulder, staring at his son with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "June, you did it. You brought him into the world. We did it," June corrected, leaning back against her husband. "We did it together." Over the next few minutes, Mrs. Porter finished caring for June and made sure both mother and baby were healthy. Once everything was settled and June was cleaned up and comfortable in fresh sheets, Mrs. Porter discreetly left the room to give the new family some privacy. Yates sat on the bed beside June, his arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their son. The baby had stopped crying and was now looking around with unfocused eyes, his tiny mouth working as if trying to figure out what to do next. "What should we name him?" June asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, June felt like they would know the right name when they heard it. "I was thinking," Yates said slowly. "What about William? It was my father's name. William Thomas Crawford." "Thomas for my brother who brought you to me." June smiled, fresh tears spilling over. "William Thomas Crawford, it is perfect." They spent the rest of the day marveling over their son, taking turns holding him, counting his tiny fingers and toes, watching him sleep and wake and make small snuffling noises. Yates was gentle and careful with the baby, but June could see the fear still lurking in his eyes, the worry that something might go wrong. But as the days passed and William continued to thrive, nursing well and sleeping in predictable patterns, Yates began to relax. He would sit with William for hours, just holding him and talking to him in a soft voice, telling him about the ranch and the animals and all the things they would do together. "I thought I could never love anyone as much as I loved Rose," Yates told June one evening as they sat together, William asleep in his cradle between them. "I felt guilty even imagining it. But now, looking at William, I realize love is not finite. It does not diminish because you spread it to more people. It just grows to accommodate everyone you care about." "That is beautifully said," June told him, reaching over to take his hand. And it is absolutely true. Loving William does not mean we love our lost families any less. It just means we are learning to live fully again, to embrace life in all its joy and pain. The months after William's birth were busy and exhausting in the best possible way. June adjusted to motherhood, learning to read her son's cries and cues, figuring out how to balance caring for him with helping to run the ranch. Yates was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking William around the house when he was fussy, singing to him in that good voice his brother had mentioned. By the time William was 6 months old, he was a chubby, happy baby with his father's dark eyes and his mother's smile. He loved being outside, would coo and wave his arms whenever they took him out to see the animals. Yates had already begun planning to teach him to ride as soon as he was old enough. In the spring of 1884, June discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with pure joy rather than fear. Yates had overcome most of his anxiety around fatherhood, and they both looked forward to adding another member to their family. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, was born in December of 1884. The labor was shorter and easier than with William, and this time Yates was calm and supportive throughout. When Mrs. Porter placed Elizabeth in his arms, Yates wept openly, pressing kisses to his daughter's dark hair. "Hello, little Rose," he whispered, using the nickname she would carry throughout her life. "Your big brother is going to love you so much." And he did. William, just over a year old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to touch her gently and bring her his toys. June and Yates would often find him standing by her cradle, patting her hand and babbling to her in his own toddler language. The years flowed by in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. June proved to have excellent business sense, and together, she and Yates made decisions that expanded their holdings and increased their profits. They hired more ranch hands, built additional barns and outbuildings, and became respected members of the San Francisco community. In 1886, their third child was born, another boy they named Samuel. In 1889, a second daughter arrived, whom they called Margaret after Yates's first wife. June had suggested the name, wanting to honor the woman who had first brought love to this ranch. Yates had cried when she proposed it, grateful that June understood his past, was part of who he was, not something to be erased or forgotten. By 1890, the ranch that had once been a place of isolation and grief had become a bustling home full of life and love. The gate that had been rusted shut for 6 years now stood wide open, welcoming neighbors and friends, ranch hands and suppliers. Yates had not only rejoined the world, he had embraced it fully. One evening in the summer of 1890, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, June leaned against her husband and smiled. William, now almost 7, was teaching 5-year-old Rose to rope a fence post. Samuel, 3, was toddling around picking wildflowers. Baby Margaret, just over a year old, sat in the grass pulling up handfuls of dirt and grass and examining them with serious concentration. "Do you remember the day I showed up at your gate?" June asked. "Every detail," Yates said, wrapping his arm around her. "I remember thinking you were the bravest or most foolish woman I had ever met, walking right up to a hermit's property and demanding to be let in." "I was desperate," June said. "I had no idea what I was doing or how I was going to survive without my family. I just knew I had to try something different." "I am so grateful you did," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You saved me, June. I was not living before you came. I was just existing, moving through the motions. You reminded me what it meant to be alive." "We saved each other," June corrected. I needed you just as much as you needed me. We were both drowning, and we found solid ground in each other. William came running up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Papa, did you see? I got the rope around the post 3 times in a row." "I saw," Yates said, grinning at his son. "You are getting pretty good at that. Soon you will be able to rope the calves." "Really?" William's eyes went wide. "Can I try tomorrow? We will see," Yates said. "Now go wash up for supper. You too, Rose." The children ran off, their laughter echoing across the valley. June watched them go, her heart so full of love it felt like it might overflow. "We should have another," Yates said suddenly. June turned to look at him in surprise. "Another child? Why not?" "We have room, we have love, and I cannot imagine our family being complete without more chaos." He was grinning, that same boyish grin that still made June's heart skip a beat after all these years. "You just want a bigger rope team," June teased. "Maybe," Yates admitted. "But also, I love our life, June. I love this family we have built, and I am not ready to be done adding to it." June considered for a moment, then smiled. "All right, let us have another, but this one has to be your responsibility when it comes to midnight feedings." Yates laughed and pulled her into a kiss. "Deal." Their 5th child, a son named Joshua, was born in the spring of 1891. He was followed by twin daughters, Abigail and Annie, in 1893. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the sounds of children laughing and playing became the constant soundtrack of their lives. Through it all, June and Yates remained deeply in love. They still made time for each other, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking and holding hands, still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt in those early days. Their love had been forged in shared grief and had grown through shared joy, becoming something strong and enduring. In the fall of 1895, 13 years after June had first walked through that rusty gate, they held a celebration to mark the anniversary of their meeting. The whole community came, filling the ranch with music and laughter and good food. As June stood in the midst of it all, watching Yates dance with their daughters while the boys ran around causing cheerful chaos, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived here, broken and lost and desperate for a reason to keep living. She thought about the man Yates had been, locked away with his grief and convinced he would never feel whole again. And she looked at what they had built together, this beautiful, chaotic, love-filled life. That night, after all the guests had left and the children were finally asleep, June and Yates stood together at that same gate where it had all begun. It was no longer rusty, having been replaced years ago with a sturdy new one that swung easily on well-oiled hinges. But it held the same significance, marked the same boundary between the world and the home they had created. "I was standing right here," June said, touching one of the bars. "I was terrified you were going to shoot me or send me away." "I almost did," Yates admitted. "I had the rifle aimed at you, my finger on the trigger, but something stopped me. Some instinct that told me you were important, that if I sent you away, I would regret it for the rest of my life." "I am glad you listened to that instinct," June said, turning to face him. Yates cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle and reverent as it had been on their wedding day. "Me too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, June Crawford. You and all those crazy children we somehow made together. I love you more than I have words to express." "I love you too," June said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Thank you for letting me through your gate all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate woman with soft city hands and no idea what she was doing. Thank you for being brave enough to knock," Yates said. "Thank you for seeing past the angry hermit to the man who was still alive underneath all that grief. Thank you for loving me." They stood there together as the stars came out overhead, holding each other and remembering all they had overcome to reach this moment. The gate stood open behind them, welcoming, a symbol of the life they had chosen, a life of love and family and hope. A life neither of them had thought possible when they first met, but which they had built together, day by day, choice by choice. Inside the house, they could hear one of the children crying, probably Samuel having a bad dream. They smiled at each other and walked back toward the house hand in hand, ready to comfort their child and then fall into bed exhausted, only to wake early the next morning and do it all over again. It was a good life, a full life, a life worth every risk they had taken to achieve it. And as June drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in her husband's arms, she sent a silent thank you to Thomas Crawford, who had seen what they both needed and had sent her to find it. She thanked her parents and her sister, whose loss had set her on this path. And she thanked Yates for having the courage to let her in when every instinct told him to keep the gate closed. The years continued to unfold with all the joys and challenges that come with raising a large family on a working ranch. William grew into a responsible young man who took his role as oldest seriously, often helping his father with the harder ranch work and watching over his younger siblings with protective care. Rose inherited her mother's head for numbers and her father's love of horses, spending hours in the stable caring for the animals and keeping meticulous records of breeding and sales. Samuel was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and coming home dirty and grinning. Margaret was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor activities, but possessing a stubborn determination that served her well. Joshua was the peacemaker, always trying to smooth over conflicts between his siblings. And the twins, Abigail and Annie, were inseparable forces of nature who kept everyone on their toes with their matching mischief. June and Yates navigated parenthood together, presenting a united front while also supporting each other through the difficult moments. There were illnesses that terrified them, accidents that stopped their hearts, and the normal conflicts that arose when strong-willed children began asserting their independence. But through it all, they held onto each other and the love that had brought them together. In 1898, William turned 15 and began talking seriously about his future. He wanted to stay on the ranch, to eventually take it over and run it himself. The conversation brought tears to Yates's eyes, gratitude that his son loved this land as much as he did. "Are you sure?" Yates asked as they stood together surveying the herd. "You are young. You could go to school, see the world, try other things." "I am sure, Papa," William said firmly. "This ranch is in my blood. I cannot imagine doing anything else." Yates pulled his son into a tight embrace. "Then I will teach you everything I know, but you have to finish your schooling first. Your mother would have my hide if I let you quit studying." William laughed. "I know. Mama takes education seriously." Rose, meanwhile, had different ambitions. At 13, she announced that she wanted to go to college to study business and agriculture at the university level. June and Yates were both surprised and proud, and they immediately began planning how to make it happen. "Are you sure about this?" June asked one evening as they discussed Rose's future. "College is expensive, and it is unusual for a woman." "I am absolutely sure," Yates said. "Rose is brilliant, and she deserves every opportunity to develop her talents. Besides, think how helpful that education will be when she comes back to help run the ranch." "Who says I am coming back?" Rose interjected from where she had been supposedly reading in the corner. "Maybe I will take my education and go build my own ranch somewhere else." Yates pretended to be wounded. "You would abandon your old father like that?" Rose grinned. "Maybe, or maybe I will come back and revolutionize the way you do everything. You will never know until I go and learn." In 1900, as the new century dawned, the Crawford Ranch was firmly established as one of the premier cattle operations in California. They had weathered droughts and economic downturns, had adapted to changing markets and new technologies. June had become a respected voice in the ranching community, her business acumen widely acknowledged. Yates had regained his reputation as a skilled rancher and was frequently consulted by younger men starting their own operations. More importantly, they had created a family legacy that extended beyond just financial success. Their children were growing up understanding the value of hard work, the importance of caring for the land and animals in their charge, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. On a warm evening in June of 1900, June and Yates celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children were in bed. They sat at the same table where they had shared so many meals, holding hands across the wood. 18 years, June marveled. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I was standing at your gate, terrified and desperate. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Yates said, raising her hand to kiss her knuckles. Every day with you feels both brand new and comfortably familiar. You are my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. I wake up every morning grateful that you had the courage to push through that gate. I wake up grateful you did not shoot me, June said, making them both laugh. It was a close thing, Yates admitted with a grin. But I am very glad I made the right choice. They talked late into the night, reminiscing about the early days, marveling over how their children were growing, making plans for the future. When they finally climbed the stairs to their bedroom, it was with the comfortable ease of two people who had built a life together through intention and effort and unwavering commitment. As June drifted off to sleep, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The tragedy that had brought her to Yates's gate, the grief that had closed him off from the world, the courage they had both found to let love in again despite the risks. The family they had built, the ranch they had grown, the life they continued to create together day by day. She thought about the woman she had been at 23, lost and broken after losing her family. And she looked at who she was now at 41, strong and confident and surrounded by love. The journey between those two versions of herself had been difficult and painful and absolutely worth it. Beside her, Yates stirred in his sleep, his arm tightening around her waist in an unconsciously protective gesture. June smiled in the darkness and let herself relax into his embrace, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. The years that followed brought the natural evolution of a family growing and changing. In 1902, Rose left for university in Sacramento, the first of the Crawford children to leave the ranch for an extended period. Yates handled her departure with stoic pride, though June found him standing in Rose's empty room more than once, looking lost. She will be back, June assured him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She loves this place too much to stay away forever. I know, Yates said. But it is hard watching them grow up and leave. It feels like time is moving too fast. William, now 19, was effectively running much of the ranch operation alongside his father, his skills and knowledge growing daily. He had started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner, and June suspected an engagement announcement was not far off. Samuel, at 15, was still finding his way, torn between his love for the ranch and a growing interest in mechanics, and the new automobiles that were starting to appear in California. Margaret, 13, had discovered a passion for teaching and spent her free time tutoring younger children from neighboring ranches. Joshua, at 11, was his father's shadow, following Yates everywhere and absorbing everything about ranching. And the 9-year-old twins were still inseparable, their latest scheme involving the training of a pair of puppies they had found abandoned on the road. Through it all, June and Yates remained the steady center of the family. They had developed rhythms and traditions over the years. Sunday dinners where everyone gathered no matter what. Evening storytelling sessions where the children begged to hear about how their parents had met. Anniversary celebrations that reminded everyone that love was worth fighting for. In 1904, their family expanded again when William married his sweetheart, Emily, in a ceremony at the ranch. Yates and June stood together watching their oldest son pledge his life to someone else, and both had tears in their eyes. "We are getting old," Yates whispered to June as they watched William and Emily dance. "We are getting older," June corrected, "but I do not feel old. I feel like we are just hitting our stride." "Maybe you are right," Yates said, pulling her onto the dance floor. "After all, we still have 5 more children to see married off." 6, June corrected with a meaningful look. Yates stopped dancing, his eyes going wide. "June, are you saying what I think you are saying?" June nodded, unable to keep the smile off her face. Surprise. "Apparently we are not quite done having babies." Yates whooped and picked her up, spinning her around right there in the middle of the dance floor while their children and guests laughed and applauded. When he set her down, he was grinning like a young man. "How old are we going to be when this one graduates from school?" he asked. "Ancient," June said, laughing. "But who cares? We have enough love for one more." Their 8th child, a daughter they named Caroline after June's sister, was born in early 1905. At 45 and 46, respectively, June and Yates found themselves back in the world of late-night feedings and diaper changes. But they approached it with the wisdom and patience that came from experience, enjoying every moment in a way they had been too exhausted and overwhelmed to do with their first babies. William and Emily settled into the small house Yates had built for them on the far edge of the ranch property. And in 1906, they welcomed Yates and June's first grandchild, a boy they named Yates William Crawford II. Holding his grandson for the first time, Yates felt the circle of life complete in a way he had never imagined possible 24 years earlier, when June had walked through his gate. "Look at this," he said to June that evening as they sat with baby Caroline on one side and their grandson sleeping peacefully on the other. "We have babies and grandbabies. How did this happen?" "Life," June said simply. "Beautiful, complicated, wonderful life. This is what happens when you say yes to it instead of shutting it out." As baby Caroline grew, she brought a special joy to the family. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Rose, now home from university with her degree and full of ideas for modernizing the ranch operations, could often be found carrying Caroline around while explaining her business plans to anyone who would listen. In 1907, Rose met a fellow rancher at a cattle auction, a young man named Daniel who ran a successful operation in the northern part of the state. It was a partnership of equals from the start, 2 people who respected each other's knowledge and ambitions. When they married in 1908, Daniel moved to the Crawford Ranch, and together he and Rose began implementing new breeding programs and business strategies that increased profits substantially. Samuel, after much soul-searching, decided to pursue his interest in mechanics while still staying connected to the ranch. He opened an automobile repair shop in San Francisco, servicing the growing number of vehicles in the area, but came home every weekend to help with ranch work. Yates had been disappointed at first that Samuel would not stay on the ranch full-time, but June helped him see that their son was finding his own path, one that still honored his roots while pursuing his passion. Margaret followed through on her teaching dreams, becoming a schoolteacher in the growing San Francisco school system. She taught reading and mathematics to children of immigrants, finding deep satisfaction in helping them build new lives in America. Joshua, true to his early devotion, stayed on the ranch and became his father's right-hand man, eventually taking over much of the daily operations as Yates began to slow down in his 50s. The twins, Abigail and Annie, surprised everyone by becoming successful horse breeders, developing a line of quarter horses that became sought after throughout California. They built their operation as an offshoot of the main ranch, working in partnership with the family while establishing their own reputation. Through all these changes and evolutions, June and Yates remained the heart of it all. They celebrated every success, comforted through every setback, and kept the family connected even as it spread and grew. Their love had weathered the test of time, deepening and maturing into something that went beyond romance into true partnership. In 1910, as they approached their 28th wedding anniversary, June and Yates took a rare trip alone together, leaving the ranch in the capable hands of William and Joshua. They traveled to San Francisco, staying in a nice hotel and revisiting the places they had been when they first courted and married. "You remember that jeweler where you bought my wedding ring?" June asked as they walked through the city streets. "I wonder if it is still there." They found it, now run by the original owner's son, and Yates surprised June by having a matching band custom made to celebrate their years together. As the jeweler measured her finger and showed them designs, June felt overwhelmed with emotion. "You did not need to do this," she told Yates. "I wanted to," he said simply. "You deserve to be celebrated every single day, but especially today, on the anniversary of the day you changed my life forever." That evening, they had dinner at a nice restaurant, dressed in their best clothes and enjoying the luxury of a meal they had not prepared themselves. Over wine and an elaborate dessert, they talked about their life together, the paths they had taken, the choices they had made. "Do you have any regrets?" June asked. Yates considered for a moment. "I regret the years I wasted in isolation, the time I lost with my brother before he died. But I cannot fully regret it, because that isolation was part of the journey that led me to be ready for you when you arrived." "What about you?" "I regret that it took tragedy to bring me to you," June said. "I wish I could have my family back, could have had them here to see the life we built. But like you, I cannot fully regret the path that led me here. This life, our family, this love we share, it is everything I never knew I needed." They walked back to their hotel hand in hand, two middle-aged people who still looked at each other with the wonder of young lovers. That night, they made love with the practiced ease of long familiarity combined with genuine passion, and June fell asleep thinking about how lucky she was to have found this man, to have built this life. The years between 1910 and 1920 were a time of consolidation and reflection for June and Yates. They watched their children all marry and start families of their own, the number of grandchildren growing to an impressive 15. The ranch had been divided into sections, with different children and their spouses managing different aspects of the operation. It had become a true family enterprise, with Sunday dinners becoming massive affairs requiring multiple tables and enough food to feed an army. Yates began teaching the oldest grandchildren the same skills he had taught their parents, his patience with the youngsters bringing joy to everyone who watched. June started writing down the family history, recording stories about how she and Yates had met, about the early struggles of the ranch, about each of their children's births and childhoods. She wanted the future generations to know where they came from, to understand the love and sacrifice that had built this legacy. In the spring of 1920, June and Yates celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. They were both in their early 60s now, slowed by age but still active and engaged with the ranch and family. The celebration was a massive affair, with all their children and grandchildren gathering for a weekend-long party. As June stood on the porch watching the chaos of her assembled family, she felt Yates come up behind her and wrap his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about how that terrified, broken woman who showed up at your gate would never have believed this was possible. That I could be surrounded by so much love, so much life, that I could be this happy. That stubborn, grief-stricken hermit would not have believed it either," Yates said, resting his chin on her shoulder. "But here we are, surrounded by everything we built together." "Thank you," June said, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you for letting me through that gate. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for this life. Thank you for insisting," Yates said, cupping her face gently. "Thank you for being brave when I could not be. Thank you for teaching me how to live again." They kissed, a sweet, lingering kiss that was witnessed by several of their grandchildren, who made exaggerated gagging noises before running off to play. June and Yates laughed, still holding each other, still as in love as they had been that first night on the porch when they had dared to hope for a future together. As the sun set on the celebration, painting the valley in shades of gold and orange, June looked out over the land she had come to love as her own. The gate at the end of the property stood open, as it had for decades now, welcoming family and friends and the life they had built together. Nobody had passed through that gate for 6 years before she arrived, but June Shepherd had walked through it anyway, and in doing so, had saved both herself and the man who became her husband. Their love story had started with grief and desperation, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage to hope again. And as June stood there in her husband's arms, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had nurtured, she knew that every hard moment, every risk, every leap of faith had been worth it. This was the life she was meant to live, and Yates Crawford was the man she was meant to love. The story that had begun with a rusty gate and a hermit rancher had become an epic of love, family, and redemption that would echo through the generations to come.